In a small town surrounded by green hills and thick forests, life was peaceful and predictable. People knew each other well, and the sense of community was strong. The streets were always quiet, except for the occasional laughter of children playing, or the sound of bicycles zooming past. It was the kind of place where everyone looked out for one another, and no one ever expected anything truly bad to happen. But sometimes, even in the most idyllic places, tragedy strikes without warning. Emily Harper was one of those people everyone loved. At just 28 years old, she was the heart of her family and a pillar of the community. She had two beautiful children, a bubbly 6-year-old girl named Lily, and a curious 4-year-old boy named Max, and a husband named Daniel who adored her more than anything. Emily wasn't just a mother. She was someone who made others feel seen and valued. Whether it was baking, cookies for a neighbor going through a tough time, volunteering at the local school's annual fair, or simply stopping to chat with an elderly woman on her way home from the grocery store, Emily had a way of making the world around her brighter. Her days were busy, but fulfilling. Mornings started early with breakfast preparations, followed by dropping off the kids at school before heading to her part-time job at the library. Evenings were spent helping Lily with her homework, reading bedtime stories to Max, and cooking dinner for Daniel when he returned from work. Weekends were reserved for family outings, picnics in the park, hikes along the forest trails, or lazy afternoons watching movies together. Life was simple, yet profoundly happy. But all of that changed one fateful evening. Emily had been running late picking up the kids from their grandparents' house because Daniel needed her help with an urgent errand. As she drove back home along the winding country road, rain began pouring heavily, turning the asphalt slick and treacherous. Visibility dropped rapidly, and despite her best efforts to drive carefully, disaster struck. Her car skidded off the road and crashed into a tree. By the time emergency services arrived, they found her unconscious behind the wheel. Paramedics worked tirelessly to save her, but ultimately, they pronounced her dead at the scene. When news of the accident reached the town, shock rippled through every household. No one could believe that someone as full of life as Emily was gone. Friends and neighbors gathered outside her home, offering condolences to Daniel, who was too stunned to speak. Tears flowed freely as people struggled to process the loss. How could this have happened? Why did fate choose someone so young, so vibrant, so essential to so many lives? The days that followed were a blur of grief and disbelief. Emily's absence left a gaping hole in the fabric of the community. The library where she worked seemed quieter, almost hollow without her cheerful presence. Parents at the school noticed how Lily clung to her father's hand now, her usual spark dimmed by sadness. And poor little Max kept asking when his mommy would come back, not fully understanding what gone really meant. As word spread about the upcoming funeral, preparations began in earnest. The church became a hub of activity, with volunteers decorating it with flowers and arranging chairs. For what promised to be a large gathering, photos of Emily were placed near the altar, capturing her infectious smile and warm eyes. Friends brought dishes to share after the service, knowing food often provided some comfort during times of mourning. Everyone wanted to do something, anything to honor her memory and support the family she left behind. Yet amid all the planning, whispers started to circulate. Some wondered if the crash had been unavoidable or if there was more to the story. Others speculated about whether Emily might have been distracted or perhaps unwell leading up to the accident. These questions lingered in the air like storm clouds, adding an undercurrent of unease to the already heavy atmosphere. Still, no one dared voice these doubts aloud, not wanting to upset Daniel or cast any shadow over Emily's legacy. For Daniel, the days leading up to the funeral felt endless. He moved through them in a daze, barely eating or sleeping. Every moment reminded him of Emily, the empty space beside him in bed, the silence where her laughter used to fill the room, the sight of her favorite mug sitting untouched on the kitchen counter. Taking care of Lily and Max was both a blessing and a burden. On one hand, they gave him purpose, forcing him to keep going even when he wanted to collapse under the weight of his sorrow. On the other hand, seeing their pain broke his heart over and over again. Each night as he tucked the kids into bed, Daniel tried to reassure them that things would get better. Mommy loved us very much, he'd say softly, brushing hair away from their tear-streaked faces. And she'll always be with us in our hearts. But deep down, he wasn't sure he believed his own words. Losing Emily felt like losing a part of himself, and he couldn't imagine how life would ever feel normal again. Despite the overwhelming sadness, the townspeople came together to ensure everything was perfect for the funeral. They polished the pews until they gleamed, arranged bouquets of lilies, Emily's favorite flower, around the casket, and rehearsed hymns that reflected her gentle spirit. Father Michael, the town's priest, spent hours crafting a eulogy that captured Emily's essence, her kindness, her humor, her boundless generosity. He remembered her as a child, sitting in the front pew with her parents, giggling quietly during sermons. He thought of her as a teenager, volunteering at the church, bake sale, and later as a young mother bringing Lily and Max to Sunday school. Emily had been a constant presence in his life, and saying goodbye to her felt unbearable. On the morning of the funeral, the sky was overcast, mirroring the somber mood of the crowd gathering outside the church. Men wore dark suits, women dressed in black, and children clutched stuffed animals or held their parents' hands tightly. The air buzzed with murmured conversations, memories shared, and prayers whispered. Inside, the scent of fresh flowers mingled with the faint aroma of candle wax, creating an atmosphere both solemn and sacred. As the clock ticked closer to the start of the service, Father Michael stood at the altar, glancing nervously at the open casket. Something about it didn't feel right, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Perhaps it was the surreal nature of the situation. Standing here, ready to bury someone who had seemed larger than life only days ago. Or maybe it was the weight of responsibility, knowing that his words would shape how people remembered Emily for years to come. Whatever it was, he took a deep breath and reminded himself to focus. Today wasn't about him. It was about celebrating Emily's life and finding solace in the love she inspired. Little did anyone know, however, that within moments, something extraordinary would happen, something that would change everything. Emily wasn't just a mother. She was the kind of person who made everyone around her feel like they mattered. She had this way of lighting up a room, not because she tried to steal the spotlight, but because her presence radiated warmth and kindness. People often said that Emily's smile could brighten even the darkest days. And it wasn't just her smile, it was the way she listened when others spoke, how she remembered tiny details about people's lives, and how she went out of her way to help without expecting anything in return. Her legacy in the town stretched far beyond her role as a mom. For years, she had been deeply involved in community activities, pouring her energy into making life better for those around her. At the local food bank, she spent countless hours sorting donations and organizing drives to ensure no family went hungry. During the holidays, she spearheaded efforts to collect toys and clothes for children whose parents struggled to make ends meet. Neighbors often joked that if there was ever a crisis, Emily would be the first to show up with a casserole or a comforting word. At school events, Emily was always the one volunteering to bake cookies, set up tables, or clean up afterward. Her famous chocolate chip cookies were legendary, soft on the inside, slightly crispy on the outside, and sprinkled with just enough love to make them unforgettable. Parents would linger at fundraisers just to grab another cookie, knowing well, they couldn't replicate the magic at home. But what stood out most wasn't her baking skills. It was the care she put into everything she did. Whether it was decorating cupcakes for a bake sale or sewing costumes for the school play, Emily approached every task with enthusiasm and dedication. Even outside organized events, Emily found ways to make a difference. Late at night, after tucking Lily and Max into bed, she would sit at the kitchen table crafting handmade cards for neighbors celebrating birthdays, anniversaries, or milestones. She didn't need an occasion to send someone a note either. If she heard someone was feeling down, a cheerful card would appear on their doorstep the next morning. These small gestures might have seemed insignificant to some, but to the recipients they meant the world. In a world where people are often too busy to notice each other, Emily's thoughtfulness stood out like a beacon. Her impact extended beyond humans, too. Animals adored her almost as much as people did. Stray cats in the neighborhood knew her by sight, knowing she carried treats in her pockets. Once, when a lost dog wandered into her yard, Emily spent hours searching for its owner, refusing to give up until the pup was safely reunited with its family. It was this innate compassion for people, animals, and even nature that defined Emily's character. She believed in leaving the world a little better than she found it, and she lived that belief every single day. When news of her death spread, the ripple effect was immediate. The library where she worked felt emptier somehow, even though the same books lined the shelves and the same chairs sat neatly in place. Patrons whispered to each other about how much they missed seeing her behind the counter, recommending novels or helping kids find picture books. Teachers at the school noticed fewer parents volunteering for events, unsure how to fill the void left by Emily's absence. Even the stray cats she fed began showing up less frequently, as if they sensed something was different. For Daniel, the loss was overwhelming. Every corner of their home reminded him of her. The scent of lavender lingering in the laundry room, the playlist of upbeat songs she loved humming while cooking dinner, the sticky notes she left on the fridge reminding him to pick up milk or check the mail. He couldn't escape the memories, nor did he want to. They were all he had left of her now. Yet as much as he clung to these reminders, they also brought waves of grief crashing over him. Each one was a painful echo of what used to be. The kids struggled in their own ways. Lily, usually so bubbly and talkative, became withdrawn, retreating into herself whenever someone mentioned her mom. Max, still too young to fully grasp the concept of death, kept asking questions Daniel didn't know how to answer. "Where did Mommy go?" he'd ask innocently, his big eyes searching for reassurance. Daniel tried his best to explain, using simple phrases like, "Mommy is in heaven watching over us," but it never felt adequate. How do you explain something so profound to a child? As the days passed, whispers began circulating among the townspeople. Not everyone was comfortable speaking openly about their doubts, but the questions lingered nonetheless. Was the accident really just an unfortunate twist of fate? Or was there more to the story? Some pointed to the heavy rain that night, wondering if it had impaired her driving. Others speculated that perhaps Emily hadn't been paying attention, distracted by thoughts of her errand or tired from a long day. Still, others quietly wondered if something mechanical, a faulty brake or tire, might have contributed to the crash. These theories weren't born out of malice, but rather a desperate attempt to make sense of the tragedy. People wanted answers, anything to ease the sting of losing someone so beloved. But the truth remained elusive, buried beneath layers of speculation and uncertainty. What everyone agreed on, however, was that the timing of Emily's death felt cruelly ironic. She had been planning a weekend getaway with Daniel and the kids, a rare chance for the family to relax and reconnect. Now, instead of packing suitcases and dreaming of adventures, they were preparing for a funeral. Amidst the sorrow, preparations for the service continued. Volunteers worked tirelessly to transform the church into a fitting tribute to Emily's life. Photos covered every available surface, capturing moments big and small. Her wedding day, birthday celebrations, candid shots of her laughing with friends. Flowers filled the air with their sweet fragrance, a stark contrast to the heaviness, weighing on everyone's hearts. Someone even brought in a quilt Emily had sewn years ago, draping it lovingly over the edge of the altar. Every detail was chosen with care, a testament to the love and respect she inspired. Father Michael played a key role in orchestrating the ceremony, ensuring it reflected Emily's spirit. He consulted with Daniel, asking which hymns she loved most and what readings might resonate with her memory. Together, they decided on passages about hope and resilience, themes that embodied Emily's approach to life. The priest practiced his eulogy repeatedly, determined to honor her legacy without reducing her to mere words. It was a daunting task, but he felt a deep responsibility to get it right. On the eve of the funeral, the church buzzed with activity. Women arranged bouquets while men adjusted seating arrangements. Children ran between rows of pews, giggling despite the somber occasion. Outside, cars lined the street as visitors arrived early to pay their respects. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with emotion. grief mingling with gratitude, sadness tempered by fond memories. Everyone understood that tomorrow would be difficult, yet they also recognized the importance of coming together to celebrate Emily's life. That night, as the final touches were added to the decorations, Father Michael stood alone near the casket. He studied the peaceful expression on Emily's face, marveling at how serene she looked despite the chaos surrounding her passing. Something nagged at him, though, a faint unease he couldn't quite shake. Perhaps it was exhaustion catching up with him, or maybe it was simply the weight of presiding over such a heartbreaking event. Whatever it was, he pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on the task ahead. No one could have predicted what would happen the following day. As the congregation filed into the church, unaware of the drama about to unfold, the stage was set for a moment that would defy logic and challenge everything they thought they knew about loss and miracles. Little did they realize, the story of Emily Harper was far from over, and it was about to take a turn none of them could have imagined. The morning of the funeral dawned gray and overcast, as if the sky itself was mourning Emily's passing. The air carried a chill that seemed to seep into everyone's bones, despite the layers of clothing they wore. People began arriving early, their footsteps crunching softly against the gravel path leading up to the church. Cars lined both sides of the narrow road, some parked so far away that their owners had to walk long distances just to reach the entrance. The scene outside was somber yet bustling, with clusters of neighbors exchanging quiet greetings and sharing memories of Emily as they made their way inside. Inside the church, the atmosphere was heavy but tinged with warmth. Volunteers had worked tirelessly to ensure every detail was perfect, and their efforts showed. Fresh flowers adorned every corner, their vibrant colors standing in stark contrast to the muted tones of the wooden pews. Bouquets of lilies, Emily's favorite, framed the altar, their delicate petals releasing a soft fragrance that filled the space. Photos of Emily at various stages of her life were displayed on easels, capturing moments of joy, laughter, and love. There she was as a child, grinning widely with missing front teeth, as a teenager, posing awkwardly in her prom dress, and as a mother, holding Lily and Max close while beaming with pride. The casket stood at the center of it all, draped with a quilt Emily had sewn years ago during a particularly cold winter. It was a patchwork of bright patterns and soothing hues, stitched together with care, a reflection of her personality. Friends and family members paused by the open coffin to say their final goodbyes, many brushing away tears as they gazed upon her peaceful face. For a moment, it almost felt like she was simply sleeping, untouched by the tragedy that had brought everyone here. As people took their seats, the hum of whispered conversations filled the room. Some shared stories about Emily's kindness, recalling how she always remembered birthdays or sent thoughtful notes when someone was feeling low. Others talked about her knack for making even the simplest tasks seem special, whether it was baking cookies for a school event or organizing a neighborhood cleanup. Her absence loomed large, leaving an ache that no amount of preparation could fully ease. At the front of the church, Father Michael stood quietly, reviewing his notes one last time. He had spent hours crafting his eulogy, determined to capture Emily's essence without reducing her to mere words. Yet, as he glanced around the crowded room, he couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. This wasn't just any funeral. It was a farewell to someone who had touched countless lives, including his own. He remembered baptizing Lily and Max, officiating events where Emily volunteered, and countless conversations over coffee after Sunday services. To say goodbye to her felt surreal, as though the fabric of the community itself was unraveling. Daniel sat in the front pew with Lily and Max, holding their hands tightly. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights and endless tears. Beside him, Lily clung to a stuffed bear Emily had given her, while Max fidgeted nervously, unsure why everyone looked so sad. Daniel tried to stay strong for his children, but every now and then, his composure cracked and he buried his face in his hands to hide the sobs that escaped. Friends sitting nearby reached out to pat his shoulder or offer tissues, their gestures, small but deeply meaningful. Behind them, rows of mourners filled the church to capacity, Some were close friends and relatives, others acquaintances who barely knew Emily but felt compelled to attend out of respect. A few strangers had even shown up, people who had benefited from her generosity without ever meeting her personally. One elderly woman, leaning heavily on a cane, told anyone who would listen how Emily used to visit her weekly, bringing homemade soup and listening patiently to tales of days gone by. Another man recounted how she once helped jumpstart his car on a freezing morning, refusing to let him repay her kindness. Stories like these painted a vivid picture of a woman who gave freely of herself, expecting nothing in return. As the clock ticked closer to the start of the service, the organist began playing a soft hymn, its melody drifting through the air like a gentle breeze. The music signaled the beginning of the ceremony, prompting those still lingering near the entrance to find their seats. Father Michael stepped forward, adjusting his robes as he prepared to address the congregation. His voice trembled slightly as he welcomed everyone, thanking them for coming to honor Emily's memory. "Today," he began, "we gather not only to mourn the loss of a remarkable woman but also to celebrate the incredible impact she had on our lives." He spoke eloquently, weaving together anecdotes about Emily's childhood, her marriage to Daniel, and her role as a mother and friend. He described her as a beacon of light in a sometimes dark world, someone who reminded others of the goodness that exists even in difficult times. As he spoke, heads nodded in agreement, and sniffles echoed throughout the church. The eulogy wasn't just a tribute to Emily. It was a reminder of the values she embodied: compassion, resilience, and unconditional love. When Father Michael finished speaking, there was a brief pause before the next part of the service began. Hymns were sung, prayers were offered, and readings were shared. Each element was chosen carefully to reflect Emily's spirit, creating a tapestry of faith and remembrance. But as the time approached for the pallbearers to carry the casket out for burial, an unusual tension settled over the room. Perhaps it was the finality of the moment, the realization that this was the last chance to see Emily before she was laid to rest. Or maybe it was something else entirely, a subtle shift in energy that no one could quite explain. Father Michael moved toward the casket, intending to perform a final blessing. He placed his hand gently on its edge, bowing his head in prayer. Then something caught his eye. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow falling across the polished wood or a flicker of movement caused by the candles nearby. But as he leaned closer, his breath hitched in his throat. There, beneath Emily's eyelids, was the faintest hint of motion, a twitch so subtle that most people wouldn't have noticed it. For a moment, Father Michael froze, unsure whether his eyes were playing tricks on him. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear his vision, but the movement persisted. Heart pounding, he leaned even closer, his mind racing with possibilities. Could it be? Was it possible that Emily... Shaking off his disbelief, he called out urgently, his voice cutting through the solemn silence of the church. "Wait," he exclaimed, turning toward the congregation. "Something isn't right. We need to stop." The room erupted into confusion. Mourners exchanged bewildered glances, unsure what was happening. Some rose from their seats, craning their necks to see what had alarmed the priest. Others murmured questions, their voices rising in volume as panic began to spread. In the chaos, paramedics stationed nearby rushed forward, wheeling a stretcher toward the front of the church. Father Michael gestured wildly, pointing to the casket and urging them to act quickly. As the medical team examined Emily, the congregation held its collective breath. Minutes stretched into eternity, each second filled with uncertainty and hope. Daniel clutched his children tightly, his face a mixture of fear and disbelief. Could this really be happening? Was it possible that the woman they had gathered to bury was still alive? The answer came slowly, but unmistakably. One of the paramedics straightened up, his expression unreadable. Then, in a voice trembling with awe, he announced the unimaginable. "She's breathing." A wave of shock rippled through the church, followed by gasps and exclamations of astonishment. Tears flowed anew, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. Emily Harper, the woman everyone thought they had lost forever, was alive. Against all odds, she had survived the crash that had claimed her life, or so they had believed. In that moment, the funeral transformed into something entirely different. What had started as a day of profound grief became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of miracles. For the townspeople, it was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always a glimmer of hope, a chance for life to defy expectations and rewrite its story. And for Emily's family, it was nothing short of a second chance, a gift they vowed never to take for granted. The moment the paramedics' words, "She's breathing," rang out in the church, a collective gasp swept through the congregation. For a few seconds, no one moved. It was as if time itself had frozen, leaving everyone suspended in disbelief. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the faint rustle of fabric as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats or leaned forward to get a better view. Then, slowly, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. Father Michael stood beside the casket, his face pale but illuminated by a mixture of shock and relief. He had been the first to notice the subtle twitch beneath Emily's eyelids, and now he felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility, not just for halting the funeral, but also for ensuring that she received immediate care. His hands trembled slightly as he stepped back to allow the paramedics more space to work. They moved with practiced efficiency, gently lifting Emily from the casket onto a stretcher while checking her vital signs. Her body was limp, but her chest rose and fell ever so slightly, a sign of life that seemed almost miraculous given the circumstances. Daniel sat in the front pew, gripping Lily and Max tightly as tears streamed down his face. At first, he hadn't understood what Father Michael meant when he called out, "Wait!" But as the paramedics rushed in and confirmed that Emily was alive, Daniel's world tilted on its axis. Just moments ago, he had been preparing to say goodbye forever. Now, against all odds, there was hope. His mind raced with questions. How could this have happened? Was she going to be okay? Would they truly get another chance together as a family? Lily and Max clung to their father, their small bodies trembling with confusion. They didn't fully grasp what was unfolding, but they sensed the shift in energy around them. Max tugged at Daniel's sleeve, his voice barely above a whisper. "Daddy, is Mommy coming back?" Daniel swallowed hard, unable to form words. Instead, he nodded, pulling his children closer as waves of emotion crashed over him. Behind them, the congregation erupted into murmurs. Some people stood up, craning their necks to see what was happening near the altar. Others remained seated, clutching tissues or prayer books, their faces etched with awe. A woman in the second row burst into tears, covering her mouth with her hand as she whispered prayers of gratitude. Nearby, a man muttered, "This doesn't make any sense. We thought she was gone." Yet, despite the confusion, there was an undeniable undercurrent of joy, a shared understanding that something extraordinary had just occurred. As the paramedics prepared to transport Emily to the hospital, Father Michael addressed the crowd. His voice wavered, but he managed to speak clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Friends," he began, "what we are witnessing today is nothing short of a miracle. Let us give thanks for this unexpected blessing and continue to pray for Emily's recovery." His words resonated deeply, prompting several people to bow their heads in silent prayer. Others reached for their phones, eager to share the news with loved ones who weren't present. Within minutes, whispers of the miracle spread beyond the walls of the church, reaching every corner of the town. Once Emily was safely loaded into the ambulance, Daniel hesitated for only a moment before following. He kissed Lily and Max on their foreheads, promising to return soon, then climbed into the vehicle alongside the medical team. As it sped away, sirens blaring, the remaining mourners spilled out of the church, gathering in small groups to process what they had just witnessed. Conversations buzzed with speculation and wonder. How had the doctors missed her faint pulse earlier? Had anyone else noticed anything unusual about her condition during the viewing? These questions swirled endlessly, yet no one could provide definitive answers. Back inside the church, Father Michael took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had never experienced anything like this in his decades of service. While he knew miracles were possible, in theory, they always seemed distant, reserved for ancient texts or faraway lands. To witness one firsthand was humbling and surreal. As he looked around the now empty sanctuary, he couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of faith. Perhaps there was a reason Emily had been spared. Perhaps her story wasn't finished yet. Outside, the rain that had persisted throughout the morning began to ease, giving way to patches of sunlight breaking through the clouds. It was as though nature itself was acknowledging the turn of events, offering a symbolic ray of hope after days of gloom. Neighbors hugged each other, sharing hugs and tears of relief. Someone suggested heading to the hospital to wait for updates, and within minutes, cars lined up along the road once again, this time bound not for the cemetery but for the emergency room. At the hospital, doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize Emily. Initial scans revealed that she had suffered severe trauma during the accident, including internal injuries and swelling in her brain. However, her body had somehow entered a deep coma-like state, masking any signs of life during earlier examinations. It was a rare phenomenon, one that baffled even seasoned medical professionals. "We've seen cases like this before," explained Dr. Peterson, the attending physician, "but they're incredibly uncommon. The human body is capable of remarkable things, especially when pushed to its limits." For Daniel, sitting anxiously in the waiting room, these explanations offered little comfort. All he cared about was seeing Emily open her eyes again, hearing her voice, feeling her touch. Nurses assured him that her condition, while critical, was stable. She would need extensive rehabilitation, both physically and mentally. But the fact that she was alive gave everyone hope. Daniel held on to that hope fiercely, clinging to it like a lifeline. Meanwhile, back in town, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. What had started as a day of mourning transformed into one of celebration. People lit candles in their windows, hung ribbons on trees, and shared meals with neighbors in honor of Emily's survival. The local bakery donated trays of pastries to the hospital staff, while volunteers organized a makeshift vigil outside the building. Even those who hadn't known Emily personally joined in, drawn by the universal appeal of such an improbable story. By evening, word of Emily's miraculous recovery had reached neighboring towns, sparking widespread interest. News outlets picked up the story, dubbing it the Miracle Mom, and highlighting the role Father Michael played in saving her life. Reporters flocked to the hospital, hoping to interview Daniel or the medical team, but hospital staff politely turned them away, citing privacy concerns. Inside, Daniel appreciated the quiet. He needed time to process everything without the added pressure of public scrutiny. That night, as exhaustion finally caught up with him, Daniel found solace in prayer. Sitting alone in a chair beside Emily's bed, he clasped her hand gently, marveling at how warm it felt. Her skin still bore bruises from the accident, but her breathing was steady, her heartbeat strong. He whispered promises to her, vowing to cherish every moment they had left together. "You're my miracle," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "And I won't waste a single second of this second chance." Unbeknownst to him, Emily stirred ever so slightly in her sleep. Her fingers twitched against his palm, a tiny movement that went unnoticed in the dimly lit room. But it was enough, a sign that her body was fighting its way back to consciousness, determined to reclaim the life she had almost lost. And though neither of them realized it yet, this was only the beginning of a journey that would test their strength, deepen their bond, and remind them and everyone who knew them of the resilience of the human spirit. The days that followed Emily's miraculous discovery at the church were a whirlwind of activity, emotion, and hope. News of her survival spread like wildfire, not just through the small town, but far beyond its borders. People who had never met her found themselves captivated by her story, how she had been pronounced dead, prepared for burial, and then brought back to life in the most unexpected way. It was the kind of tale that seemed too extraordinary to be true, yet there she was, lying in a hospital bed, fighting to recover. At the hospital, Emily became the center of attention, not because she sought it, but because her presence inspired awe. Nurses checked on her frequently, adjusting IV drips, monitoring machines, and whispering words of encouragement as if their voices might will her awake. Doctors conducted tests daily, marveling at how her body responded to treatment despite the severity of her injuries. Her case defied medical logic, leaving even seasoned professionals scratching their heads. "It's rare," one doctor admitted during rounds, "but sometimes the human body has ways of healing itself that science can't fully explain." For Daniel, every moment spent waiting felt like an eternity. He rarely left Emily's side, alternating between holding her hand, pacing the room, and collapsing into the chair beside her bed when exhaustion overtook him. The initial shock of her survival had given way to a mix of emotions: gratitude, fear, and uncertainty. Gratitude because she was alive, fear because her condition remained fragile, and uncertainty about what lay ahead once she woke up, if she woke up. Would she remember him? Would she recognize Lily and Max? These questions haunted him, but he pushed them aside, focusing instead on being present for her. Lily and Max visited often, though hospital staff limited their time to avoid overwhelming them. Seeing their mother hooked up to machines and tubes was difficult for the children, especially Max, who still didn't fully understand why she wasn't talking or hugging them like usual. During one visit, Lily climbed onto the edge of the bed carefully, leaning close to Emily's face. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling, "we miss you so much. Please come back." Tears streamed down her cheeks as Daniel pulled her into his arms, comforting her as best he could. Max stood nearby, clutching a stuffed animal Emily had given him months ago. "Is Mommy sleeping?" he asked innocently. Daniel nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, buddy. She's resting, but she'll wake up soon." Back in the town, life continued, but everything felt different. The tragedy that had once united the community, in grief now transformed into a shared sense of wonder and celebration. Neighbors organized meals for Daniel and the kids, ensuring they wouldn't have to worry about cooking during such a stressful time. Friends took turns babysitting Lily and Max, giving Daniel space to focus on Emily without neglecting his responsibilities as a father. Even strangers pitched in, donating money to help cover medical expenses or sending cards filled with prayers and well wishes. Father Michael played a pivotal role in keeping spirits high. He visited the hospital regularly, offering words of comfort and leading impromptu prayer sessions for anyone who needed them. His faith had always been strong, but witnessing Emily's revival deepened it in ways he couldn't articulate. Every time he looked at her, lying there surrounded by monitors and wires, he saw proof of something greater, a reminder that life is unpredictable and full of mysteries we may never fully comprehend. "God works in mysterious ways," he told Daniel one evening, "and I believe Emily's journey isn't over yet." As the days turned into weeks, signs of progress began to emerge. Emily's vitals improved steadily, and doctors grew optimistic about her chances of waking up. One morning, a nurse noticed her eyelids fluttering slightly, a sign that her brain activity was increasing. Later that same day, her fingers twitched again, this time more deliberately. Daniel sat beside her, watching intently, his heart pounding with anticipation. "Come on, Em," he murmured, squeezing her hand. "You're stronger than this. Fight your way back to us." Finally, after nearly 3 weeks in a coma-like state, Emily opened her eyes. At first, her gaze was unfocused, darting around the room as if trying to make sense of where she was. Then, slowly, recognition dawned in her expression. Her lips parted, forming a single word. "Daniel." His name came out hoarse and barely audible, but it was enough to send waves of relief crashing over him. Tears spilled down his cheeks as he leaned closer, cupping her face gently. "I'm here, Em," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm right here." Over the next few days, Emily's recovery accelerated. She began speaking in short sentences, asking about Lily and Max, and expressing gratitude for everyone who had supported her family. Doctors warned her that rehabilitation would be long and challenging. She would need physical therapy to regain strength, cognitive exercises to sharpen her memory, and emotional support to process the trauma of the accident. But Emily faced these challenges with determination, drawing on the same resilience that had defined her throughout her life. Visitors flooded her room, eager to see her awake and alert. Friends brought flowers, homemade meals, and stories of how her survival had touched their lives. Children from the neighborhood drew pictures for her, filling sheets of paper with rainbows, hearts, and messages like, "We love you, Mrs. Harper." Emily cherished each gesture, her eyes lighting up whenever someone entered the room. Though her body was weak, her spirit remained unshaken, a testament to the woman she had always been. One afternoon, Father Michael stopped by with a small journal he had started compiling during her recovery. Inside were notes from townspeople sharing their favorite memories of her, the time she baked cookies for a bake sale, the way she always remembered birthdays, the countless acts of kindness she performed without expecting anything in return. "This is for you," he said, handing it to her, "a reminder of how much you mean to all of us." Emily flipped through the pages, tears streaming down her face as she read each entry. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I did to deserve all this love." Her awakening also sparked conversations about the fragility and beauty of life. People reflected on how quickly things can change, how precious every moment truly is. Some resolved to spend more time with loved ones, while others vowed to live with greater purpose and intention. Emily's story became a catalyst for change, not just within her own family, but across the entire community. Strangers who had never met her before began volunteering at local charities, inspired by her legacy of compassion and generosity. For Daniel, seeing Emily awake and aware filled him with a renewed sense of hope. The dark cloud of grief that had hung over him since the accident began to lift, replaced by gratitude and joy. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. They still had mountains to climb, but they would face them together. And as he watched Emily interact with their children during video calls from the hospital, laughing softly and reassuring them that she'd be home soon, he realized something profound. Miracles aren't just about surviving the impossible. They're about finding strength in vulnerability, connection in loss, and meaning in the moments we least expect. Emily's journey was far from over. There would be setbacks and struggles, victories and milestones. But one thing was certain: she had been given a second chance, a gift wrapped in chaos and uncertainty. And as she lay in that hospital bed, surrounded by love and hope, she made a silent promise to herself: to embrace every moment, cherish every relationship, and live her life in a way that honored the miracle she had become.